Chapter 9 in Pippi Longstocking is Pippi Goes to a Coffee Party. Tommy's and Anika's mother had invited a few ladies to a coffee party, and as she had done plenty of baking, she thought Tommy and Anika might invite Pippi over at the same time. The children would entertain each other and give no trouble to anyone. Do you really think they're going to give no trouble to anyone? Tommy and Anika were overjoyed when their mother told them and immediately dashed over to Pippi's house to invite her. Pippi was in the garden watering the few flowers still in bloom with an old rusty watering can. As it was raining cats and dogs that day, Tommy told Pippi her watering seemed hardly necessary. So it says, as it was raining cats and dogs. That is an idiom. Does it really mean that cats and dogs are falling from the sky? No, it means it's pouring down rain, and she's out there watering the flowers. So Tommy's like, I don't think that's necessary, because, it's pouring down rain. But that is an idiom. It's words that have a different meaning from what they actually sound like, because raining cats and dogs sounds like there's cats and dogs falling from the sky, but that's not really what it means. Yes, that's what you say, said Pippi grudgingly, but I've lain awake all night thinking what fun it's going to be to get up and water, and I'm not about to let a little rain stand in my way. Now Anika came forth with the delightful news about the coffee party. A coffee party? Me? Cried Pippi, and she was so excited that she began to water Tommy instead of the rose bush she intended to sprinkle. Oh, what will happen? I'm so nervous. What if I can't behave myself? Of course you can, said Anika. Can she really? Don't you be too certain about that, said Pippi. You can be sure I'll try, but I have noticed several times that people don't think I know how to behave, even when I'm trying as hard as I can. At sea, we were never so fussy about things like that, but I promise that I'll take special pains today, so you won't have to be ashamed of me. Good, said Tommy, and he and Anika hurried home again in the rain. This afternoon at 3 o'clock, don't forget, cried Anika, peeking out from under the umbrella. At 3 o'clock, a very stylish young lady walked up the steps of the Sertigrens' house. Who's the Sertigrens? That'd be Anika and Tommy. It was Pippi Longstocking. For this special occasion, she had unbraided her pigtails, and her red hair hung like a lion's mane around her. That is a simile. Her red hair is being compared to a lion's mane. So when it compares those two things, the hair to the lion's mane, it gives you a good picture, a visual image of of seeing this girl with this big red hair all over her. With red crayon, she had painted her mouth fiery red, and she had blackened her eyebrows so that she looked almost dangerous. With the crayon, she also had painted her fingernails, and she put big green rosettes on her shoes. She painted herself with a crayon? I should imagine I'll be the most stylish person of all this party, she said contentedly to herself as she rang the doorbell. In the Settergren's living room sat 3 fine ladies, with them Tommy, Anika, and their mother. A wonderful coffee table had been spread, and in the fireplace a fire was burning brightly. The ladies were talking quietly with one another, and Tommy and Anika were sitting on the sofa looking at an album. Everyone was so peaceful. Suddenly, the peace was shattered. Attention! A piercing cry came from the hall, and the next minute, Pippi Longstocking stood in the doorway. She had cried out so loudly and so unexpectedly that the ladies had jumped in their seats. Forward march! Came the next command. There is Pippi entering the living room for the coffee party. Pippi, with measured steps, walked up to Miss Settergren. Halt! She stopped. Arms forward! 1, 2, she cried, with both hands gripped one of Miss Sittergren's hands and shook it heartily. Knee bend, she shrieked, and curtsied prettily. Then she smiled at Mrs. Sittergren and said in her ordinary voice, You see, I'm really very shy, so if I didn't give myself some commands, I'd just stand in the hall and not dare come in. Then she rushed up to the other ladies and kissed them on the cheek. Charming, charming, upon my honor, said she, for she had once heard a stylish gentleman say that to a lady. Then she sat down in the best chair she could find. Miss Sittergren had intended the children to have their party up in Tommy and Anika's room, but Pippi stayed calmly in her chair, slapped herself on the knee, and said, looking at the coffee table, That certainly looks good. When do we begin? At that moment, Ella, the maid, came in with the coffee pot, and Miss Sittergren said, Please come and have some coffee. First, cried Pippi, and was up by the table in 2 skips. She heaped as many cakes as she could onto a plate, threw 5 lumps of sugar into a coffee cup, emptied half the cream pitcher into her cup, and was back in her chair with her lute even before the ladies had reached the table. Pippi stretched her legs out in front of her and placed the plate of cakes between her toes. Then she merrily dumped cakes in her coffee cup and stuffed so many in her mouth at once that she couldn't have uttered a word, no matter how hard she tried. In the twinkling of an eye, she had finished all the cakes on the plate. She got up, struck the plate as if it were a tambourine, and went up to the table to see if there were any cakes left. The ladies looked disapprovingly at her, but that didn't bother her. Chatting gaily, she walked around the table, snatching a cake here and a cake there. It certainly was nice of you to invite me, she said. I've never been to a coffee party before. On the table stood a large cream pie, decorated in the center with a piece of red candy. Pippi stood with her hands behind her back and looked at it. Suddenly, she bent down and snatched the candy with her teeth. But she dived down a little too hastily, and when she came up again, her whole face was covered with whipped cream. Goody! Laughed Pippi. Now we can play blind man's buff, for we certainly got a blind man all made to order. I can't see a thing. She stuck out her tongue and licked away the cream. This was indeed a dreadful accident, said she, and the pie is all ruined now anyway, so I may as well eat it all up at once. She dug into it with the pie server, and in a few minutes the whole pie had disappeared. Pippi patted her stomach contently. Miss Sittergren had gone out into the kitchen, so she knew nothing about the accident to the cream pie. But the other ladies looked very sternly at Pippi. No doubt they would have liked a little piece too. Pippi noticed that they looked disappointed and decided to cheer them up. Now you mustn't feel bad about such a little accident, she said comfortingly. The main thing is that we have our health, and at a coffee party you should have fun. She then picked up a sugar bowl and tipped all the lumps sugar in it onto the floor. Well, my goodness, she cried. Now look what I've done. How could I make such a mistake? I thought this was the granulated sugar. Bad luck seems to follow me today. So she thought it was the granulated sugar, not the sugar cubes, and she's still dumping it on the floor? Why is she trying to dump sugar on the floor? Thereupon, she took a sugar spoon out of another bowl, and she began to sprinkle granulated sugar all over the floor. I hope you notice, she said, that this is the kind of sugar you sprinkle on things. So it's perfectly all right for me to do this, because why should there be the kind of sugar to sprinkle on things if somebody doesn't go and sprinkle it? That's what I'd like to know. Have you ever noticed what fun it is to walk on a floor that has sugar sprinkled all over it? She asked the ladies. Of course, it's even more fun when you're barefoot, she added as she pulled off her shoes and stockings. You ought to try it too, because nothing's more fun believe me. At that moment, Miss Settergren came in, and when she saw the sugar all over the floor, she took Pippi firmly by the arm and led her over to the sofa to Tommy and Anika. Then she went over to the ladies and invited them to have more coffee. That the cream pie had disappeared only made her happy because she thought the ladies had liked it so much they had eaten it all up. Pippi, Tommy, and Anika sat talking quietly on the sofa. The fire crackled on the hearth. The ladies drank their coffee, and all was quiet and peaceful again. And as so often happens at coffee parties, the ladies began to talk about their servant problems. Apparently, they had not been able to get very good servants, for there were not all satisfied with them, and they agreed that it really was better not to have any servants at all. It was much more satisfactory to do things yourself, because then at least you knew things were done right. So this is, if you notice, when she first came, it said that the maid walked in and she asked her to sit down and have coffee. So apparently this is set in a time where everybody has servants, maids, or people who wait on them and help them do things. Pippi sat on the sofa listening, and after the ladies had been talking a while, she said, "Once my grandmother had a servant named Malin. She had chilblains on her feet. Chilblains. She had chilblains on her feet. I don't know what chilblains are. I'm going to assume it's shoes, or maybe it's like calluses or warts or something. Don't know. She had chilblains on her feet, but otherwise there was nothing wrong with her. The only annoying thing was that as soon as company came, she would rush at them and bite their legs. And bark. Oh, how she would bark. You could hear it all through the neighborhood. But it was only because she was playful. Only, of course, strangers didn't always understand that. The dean's wife, an elderly woman, came to see grandmother once soon after Malin first came. And when Malin came dashing at her and bit her in the ankle, the dean's wife screamed so loudly that it scared Malin, so that her teeth clamped together and she couldn't get them apart. There she sat stuck to the dean's wife's ankle until Friday, and grandmother had to peel the potatoes herself. But at least it was well done. She peeled so well that when she was done, there were no potatoes left, only peelings. But after that Friday, the dean's wife never came to call on grandmother again. She just never could take a joke. And poor Malin, who was always so good-natured and happy. Though for the matter, she was a little touchy at times. There's no denying that. Once when grandmother poked a fork in her ear, she howled all day. Pippi looked around and smiled pleasantly. "Yes, that was Malin for you," she said, and twiddled her thumbs. The ladies acted as if they had heard nothing. They continued to talk. "If my Rosa were only clean," said Miss Berggren, "then maybe I could keep her." "If my Rosa were only clean," said Miss Berggren, "then maybe I could keep her. But she's a regular pig." "Say, you ought to have seen Miss Malin," Pippi interrupted. "Malin was so outrageously dirty that it was a joy to see her," grandmother said. For the longest time, grandmother thought she had a very dark complexion, but honest and true, it was nothing but dirt that would wash off. And once at a bazaar at the city hotel, she got first prize for the dirt under her nails. She got a prize for the dirt under her nails? "Mercy me, how dirty that girl was," said Pippi happily. Miss Settergren looked at her sternly. "Can you imagine," said Miss Granberg, "the other evening when Britta was going out, she borrowed my blue satin dress without even asking for it. Isn't that dreadful?" "Yes, indeed," said Pippi. "She certainly seems to be cut from the same piece of cloth as Malin, from what you say. Grandmother had a pink undershirt that she was specially fond of, but the worst of it was that Malin liked it too. And every morning, grandmother and Malin argued about who was to wear the undershirt. At last, they decided it would be fair to take turns and each wear it every other day. But imagine how tricky Malin could be. Sometimes she'd come running in when it wasn't her turn at all and say, 'No mashed turnip today if I can't wear the pink woolen undershirt.' Well, what was grandmother to do? Mashed turnip was her favorite dish. There was nothing for it but to give Malin the shirt. As soon as Malin got the shirt, she went out to the kitchen as nice as could be and began to mash turnip so it spattered all over the walls. There was silence for a little while, and then Miss Alexanderson said, "I'm not absolutely certain, but I strongly suspect that my Hutta steals. In fact, I've noticed that things disappear." "Malin," began Pippi, but Miss Sturtevant interrupted her. "Children," she said decidedly, "go up to the nursery immediately." "Yes, but I was only going to tell that Malin stole too," said Pippi. "Like a raven, everything she could lay her hands on. She used to get up in the middle of the night and steal. Otherwise, she couldn't sleep well," she said. "Once she stole grandmother's piano and tucked it into her own top bureau drawer." Now, could you really tuck a piano into a bureau drawer? Do you know what a bureau drawer is? It's like a dresser drawer. "She was very clever with her hands," grandmother said. Tommy and Anika took hold of Pippi and pulled her out of the room and up the stairs. The ladies began on their third cups of coffee, and Miss Sturtevant said, "It's not that I want to complain about my Ella, but she does break the china." A red head appeared over the stair rail. "Speaking of Malin," said Pippi, "maybe you were wondering if she used to break any china. Well, she did. She set apart one day a week just to break china. It was Tuesday," grandmother said. "As early as 5 o'clock on Tuesday mornings, you could hear this jewel of a maid in the kitchen breaking china. She began with the coffee cups and glasses and little things that and then went on the soup bowls and dinner plates, and she finished up with the platters and soup tureens. Soup tureens. Don't know what a tureen is. Maybe that you could write that on your book log. Tureens. Something obviously to hold some soup. I wonder if it's something to hold soup to keep it hot. Maybe. There was such a crash bang in the kitchen all morning that it was a joy to hear it, grandmother said. And if Malin had any spare time late in the afternoon, she would go into the drawing room with a little hammer and knock down the antique East Indian plates that were hanging on the walls. Grandmother bought new china every Wednesday, said Pippi, and disappeared up the stairs as quickly as a jack-in-the-box. As quickly as a jack-in-the-box, comparing Pippi to a jack-in-the-box using the word as a simile. But now Miss Sturtevant's patience had come to an end. She ran up the stairs into the nursery and up to Pippi, who had just begun to teach Tommy to stand on his head. "You must never come here again," said Miss Sturtevant, "if you can't behave any better than this." Pippi looked at her in astonishment, and her eyes slowly filled with tears. "That's just what I was afraid of," she said, "that I couldn't behave properly. It's no use to try. I'll never learn. I should have just stayed on the ocean." She curtsied to Miss Sturtevant and said goodbye to Tommy and Anika and went slowly downstairs. The ladies were now getting ready to go home too. Pippi sat down in the hall near the shelf where rubbers were kept and watched the ladies putting on their hats and coats. "Too bad you don't like your maids," she said. "You should have one like Malin. Grandmother always said there was nobody like her. Imagine. One Christmas when Malin was going to serve a little roast pig, do you know what she did? She had read in the cookbooks that roast pig must be served with frilled paper in the ears and an apple in the mouth. But poor Malin didn't understand that it was the pig who was supposed to have the apple. You should have seen her when she came in on Christmas Eve with her best apron on and a big Gravenstein apple in her mouth. 'Oh, Malin, you're crazy,' Grandma said to her. And Malin couldn't say a word in her own defense. She could only wiggle her ears until the frilled paper rustled. To be sure, she tried to say something, but it just sounded like and of course she couldn't bite people in the leg as she usually did, and it would be a day when there was a lot of company. Poor little Malin, it wasn't a very happy Christmas Eve for her, said Pippi sadly. The ladies were now dressed and said a last goodbye to Miss Sturtevant and Pippi ran up to her and whispered, "Forgive me, because I couldn't behave myself. Goodbye." Then she put on her large hat and followed the ladies. Outside the gate, their ways parted. Pippi went toward Villa Villacula, and the ladies the other direction. When they had gone a little way, they heard someone panting behind them. It was Pippi, who had come racing back. You can imagine that grandmother mourned when she lost Malin. Just think, one Tuesday morning when Malin had time to break only about a dozen teacups, she ran away and went to sea. And grandmother had to break the china herself that day. She wasn't used to it, poor thing, and she got blisters all over her hands. She never saw Malin again. And that was a shame, because she was such an excellent maid, grandmother said. Pippi left, the ladies hurried on, but when they had gone a couple of 100 feet, they heard Pippi from far off, yelling at the top of her lungs, "She never slept under the beds!" That was an interesting chapter. So Pippi was not a very good guest. She kept interrupting and telling crazy stories. Do we think any of those stories she told were true? Pippi's had a very unusual, crazy life, but I'm not thinking those were true. Please make sure that you find a part of your book log and respond to it for chapter 9.